Hello everyone and welcome to today's interview when we're talking about inflammatic resistance. That is the growing problem we have where our horses are becoming resistant to the medicine we give them to get rid of internal parasites. My name's Claire Williams and I work for the British Equestrian Trade Association, and this evening I'm joined by Claire Shand, who's the Marketing and Comms Director for Westgate Laboratories, and like me, is an SQP or a RAMA, but we'll explain what that is later on. Hello, Claire, how are you?
Hi, Claire. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Bit warm, but other than that, all good.
I know, we mustn't complain.
I know, right?
So,
I'm wearing shorts, so just not built for this heat, that's all.
And we're both in the north, so we're probably not quite as warm as the rest of the country.
Exactly.
So we're here to talk about inflammatic resistance. Now, we use that term a lot, but perhaps can you explain what it is? And if we've got some slides as well that Claire's kindly done for us. So what is inflammatic resistance?
Yeah, thanks very much, Claire. Well, I guess it's pretty scary, really, when we look at it as an overall threat to our horse health. Resistance, what it means is not being able to put horses on pasture and keep them safe from parasites. It means more disease, more colics, and ultimately death of horses from untreatable parasite burden. So it's, beautiful. And sorry to ruin it for everyone, but this is actually really serious. And it's why, I'm really glad to be here and we're having this conversation, because it's something that we all need to wise up to, essentially. I thought, first of all, let's have a little look at the parasite life cycle, and that will help us to understand a little bit about what it is and then also how this develops. So we've got these worms that are the adult worms. They live in our horse's gut, so in the belly of the horse. And these worms, they produce millions of eggs a day. That's what evolution has prepared them for. And these eggs then get passed out in the feces of the horse, and they land up on our pasture. And then what the aim of the worm is to complete its life cycle to get back inside the horse. So these eggs that are on the pasture, they are hatching and they're wriggling away as far as possible to climb a blade of grass and to get eaten by a horse and re-ingested so that they can continue that life cycle and go on and reinfect new horses as a worm. And the thing that always blows my mind about this picture is these little tiny larval worms, like on this blade of grass here. That's all little tiny worms in one single dewdrop. So that's ready to infect our horses. So really, we're playing against evolution and all of these mega larvae who are trying to get back in the horses, and that's what kind of we're struggling against in terms of the worms perpetuating over and over. And particularly when the horses are on the pasture, they're grazing back over the same land rather than being prairie style, where they'd be going on and there'd be other species that were there grazing and eating them, and they're species specific, so not surviving. So that's what we're fighting against. And we've got these worms, we're treating them chemically. And so wormer resistance is the worm's reaction to these wormers that we've got. So it's a big title here. Resistance is the heritable ability of the worm to survive treatment. So it's a genetic mutation or development, if you like, that the worms get. And once they've got that, they obviously pass that on to their offspring. So it means that once a worm is resistant, it never then becomes susceptible again to the drug, so it doesn't reverse, it's always there. So once this is in motion, it's going to naturally be on this snowball effect of growing. So we can see here by the little graphic that we've got, the horse is wormed. There's always a natural burden of worms that are a little bit resistant. So to go to market, most wormers are 98, 99% effective. So there's always a small number that are going to escape that treatment. And when we treat those worms, you leave those ones that aren't susceptible in the gut, and they're there then ready to breed and to go on. And so we naturally breed for this and it's slowly, but these breed and multiply, and these are the ones then that grow slowly over time, this population of resistant worms. And then what we end up with is this horse pasture where none of the worms on the pasture are able to be treated by the chemicals that we've got. They don't respond to treatment, and that's when we're really in a pickle with high risk of disease because we can't treat them.
And it's something we're facing ourselves, aren't we? We talk about antibiotic resistance, so that's why, to put it in a human context equally, doctors are becoming increasingly careful about the volume of antibiotics they prescribe because they are losing their effectiveness. And similarly, the chemical wormers or the medicines we're giving our horses just are no longer as effective anymore. And that's caused by a whole range of things. For example, underdosing can be a problem as well, can't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So that will just give the worms a headache, and yet they then survive another day and they go on to develop their resistance. And using too many of the same chemical, and so lots of different ways though that we can manage our horses to help to slow this down.
So where are we with wormers? So they all have a specific active, don't they, to deal with the different worms within the horse. But they cost a lot to put these on the market, and that's why we have a limited range, don't we?
Exactly, and you'll be familiar with quite a number of the names, but if you think of it again, paralleling our human medicine, there'll be one active like an ibuprofen, but you'll know that via lots of different brand names. So the same is said with wormers. So actually, like beneath it all, we've actually only got 5 chemicals, that's it. And this is quite a complex slide, but actually what we need to understand from it, if you look at the wormers, the chemicals down the left hand side, and then across the top is all the parasites that we're looking to treat, and anywhere that's not a bright green is where we're getting into trouble. So particularly these adult small red worm here in that first column, you'll see there looking down that there now isn't a wormer that hasn't got some level of documented resistance to it, which, because these adult small red worm, they're some of our most prevalent parasites that we're trying to treat in horses, then that's a real worry, because small red worm, they're encysted. The larval stages can cause a really serious colic that is often fatal to horses. So the next column is those larval stages and what we have to treat them, and you'll see there fenbendazole, that we'll know as Panacur, given as a 5-day. A lot of resistance now to that, thought around sort of 60 to 80% for those particular worms to that chemical. Moxidectin lower down there, which we'll know as in the Equest and Equest Pramox products. Again, shortened egg reappearance times, which is the first sort of really red flag that we are seeing resistance building to that. So that's all we've got. There's nothing else to treat those. And it's really serious, this problem. Where do we go with this? And how do we preserve these key medicines against these particular parasites so that they can continue to be effective for our horses?
Yes, because some of these are quite old now, aren't they? There hasn't really been a new active on the market for internal parasites for a long time.
Yeah, our newest Moxidectin is a 90s baby. So that's over 20 years old now. So, they've been around a long time. And we go back to the 1960s for the likes of fenbendazole and Pyrantel.
Yeah.
And when they came in, it was right, okay, we need to treat every 8 weeks for these. And we did that religiously, and we thought we were doing a really good thing. And what we were actually doing is speeding this development of resistance, giving the worms all this opportunity to get exposed and to devise ways not to be affected by it, essentially.
So why do we need to control worms? Because a certain worm burden isn't a bad thing, but it's when they get too much that it does cause damage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Claire. I mean, the thinking is that horses can deal really well with a small worm burden, and they actually stimulate the immune system, and they're not a bad thing per se. We're never going to eradicate them. We tried that, it's impossible. I mean, think of all those eggs that the horse is putting out there, or being put out in those feces. So they're in the environment, that we can't get rid of those. But I mean, in terms of, where are we going with this? Oh, I think we'll skip through. Anyway, so I thought I had a different slide, but never mind. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the problems they cause, the different worms have different sort of ways that they cause disease within the horse. But I mean, you can get things like colics. There's some have a migratory to the lungs. They have nutrient kind of uptake that they restrict. You have respiratory damage. You have these colics for both tapeworm and encysted small red worm. The large strong gal that we don't see so many of anymore, they have they can weaken the mesenteric artery, which causes like fatal, dramatic hemorrhages and death of horses. So horrible, horrible things. And ultimately, a lot of these either wind up in horses never reaching full potential, always being compromised, either nutritionally or respiratory, or unfortunately death as well. So, you know, it's really something that we need to take a lot of care about. And if we can't treat them, then that is becoming one of the biggest problems facing the veterinary industry just now. I mean, it's huge. And despite all of these really exciting veterinary developments and ways of treating injuries and rehab and performance horses, it still comes down to the fact that horses are getting sick and dying from worm burdens, then, you know, they'll never reach their full potential. And it's actually, you know, it's a big issue.
And that really is what resistance means, isn't it? It is, if they build up resistance, we can't fight using the medicinal means, and that's when we have problems. As you say, we get really sick horse pastures because the worms keep getting put back into the field because of our inability to control them using chemical or medicinal means. So where else is it possible for people to control that worm burden in their horses at the same time as reducing the use of wormers themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we are limited in terms of our chemicals. The really good news is that the testing is really on our side. So this is where we're really moving towards for parasite control. So worm egg counts, like cornerstone of any testing program. The research says that 20% of the worms are in, or 80% of the worms are in 20% of the horses. So a herd all kept the same. That's where the worms are going to hang out to be found in those horses, which means that blanket worming, there's no place for that anymore, but we can reduce the worming use by up to 82% by targeting just those horses. We can now tapeworm test horses, and less than 27% of horses we test for that need a treatment. And then also we've got this new blood test that's available, which detects encysted stages of small red worm, and again is going to help us to preserve the key medicines and give those fewer chemicals, which so all brilliant things.
Because that's in effect what we've been doing, isn't it? Every 8 weeks, and we all learned really, really well. We were good students and we did what we were told by both vets and SQPs. You should use these drugs with this frequency. And so we were treating our horses when actually some of them probably, well, a lot of them didn't actually need treating.
Exactly that. Yeah. So it's this 80-20 rule, and what's hard to understand is that it comes down to each individual horse's immunity. So you'll get a herd of horses that are all kept the same. Ostensibly, they're on the same pasture, they're fed the same, you know, but when you test them, you'll get just a small portion usually that need the treatment and the rest don't need anything. So that gives us the ability to target just those horses. And that can be a complex mix of like immune factors and hereditary genetics. It can be any other illnesses that are going on, like systemic things in the horse can predispose them. So if their immune system's working really hard, if they're EMS or laminitis or anything like that, it's going to give them less ability to fight the parasites that are attacking them as well. It can be behavioral. So if you've got a greedy horse that grazes closer to the piles of dung, they're more likely to pick up parasites, the larvae there that have wriggled away from the dung, than others. So a whole host of different things going on there. But yeah, so it's really about identifying that and then getting the help to get the prescription from your RAMA or your vet for the right treatment for the horse, the parasite, the time of year. So lots of different things to juggle to decide what's best then. There isn't any more the one size fits all approach.
No, so that excuse me, so that first key is to start looking at only treating when you need to treat, and that will hopefully start to slow down the growth of resistance in the future.
Exactly. So it's reducing the exposure, because a worm has to be exposed to the chemical in order to develop the resistance, is the key message. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we know that some horses are more susceptible to worms, so youngsters. So, you know, I've got horses, I have all mine out together. I did worm egg count test, and the younger of them, when she was a 3-year-old, she had a really high burden. All the older ones didn't. So that just shows that it is so reliant on type and age and yeah, state of health as well.
Yeah, definitely. Immature immune systems, always more susceptible. And we know lots of people who started to breed and said, we never had a worm problem until we had youngsters. And now, like, yeah, when we test, we have to treat those, and is often the way.
Yeah.
And
so
young horses, definitely, like, you know, under 6 months, we need proactive support with worming to help them, because... Carry on, Claire, sorry.
No, and that's what we talk about strategic worming, isn't it? Is that we work out a plan, and we, being either your vet or your pharmacist or your RAMA, can help owners work out a plan so that they can strategically either worm or test across the year.
Definitely. So rather than just being ad hoc about it and thinking, oh, when did I do this? You know, much better to sit down, have it in the calendar, and know exactly what needs to be done at what particular point is the key. There we go. So like for a healthy adult horse, essentially, it's all based on the testing of the life cycle of the worms. And so for a healthy adult horse, we're looking at a worm egg count there every 3 months. So seasonally thinking about, okay, spring, we need to worm egg count for our redworm and ascarid, summer and autumn the same. And in that late autumn, winter, that's when we really need to address those larval stages that we talked about. So either with a blood test or a proactive treatment, depending on the test results that you've been getting through the year. And then tapeworm, we're looking at that every 6 months. So either spring and autumn, summer, winter. It doesn't really matter, just, you know, often to fit in with your yard and how you are working things out on that one.
And you've got something there about reduction tests. So what are reduction tests?
Yeah, I mean, this is really where we need to be starting to understand where is resistance building, to which chemicals, and then that will really help us to inform any treatment that we give and how we handle that. So a reduction test is, I do have a slide for it somewhere.
There we go, back one, I think.
No, I think what I've done is I've uploaded my wrong slide, so it's not the one that I thought I had on here. Can we go back to yours, Claire, and then
I'll try.
Yeah, we did that in our haste, didn't we?
Tell us a bit about reduction tests, and I'll upload it.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah. So reduction test is basically doing a second worm egg count after your first one. So you are doing the test, and it indicates treatment is necessary. You give your treatment, and then 10 to 14 days after that, that's when you're going back in to do another worm egg count. Here we go. And that's going to give you a percentage as the reduction to identify whether you've got chemical resistance there or not. So it's a really, really effective way. I mean, I can't stress enough how we can't just give a wormer now and expect it's going to work. You know, you've got to be doing these testings to check, basically, and to make sure that's been effective.
And it's got to be a test where it shows a treatment is necessary. So if you've got really low E counts, then a reduction test is pointless because you know you've already got a low count.
Exactly that, yeah. And the advice is to be doing this at least once a year. So to understand where you're at in terms of that chemical resistance be a really, really good thing to put in your plan.
And so what we're talking about is using wormers responsibly. And so understanding when to give them, how to give them, and how much to give them.
That's the one, yeah. So understanding the weight of the horse is really important. So we need to, this is a little example of Bert, who and his actual weight, and then some of the guesstimates that went on. And, you know, we talked already about the fact that if we're underdosing, it's really not going to be effective enough. So we're going to choose the right chemical. We're going to reserve those key medicines, particularly those ones that are treating the larval stages of the small red worm, and giving it on a surfaced area as well. So if you've got any spit out, you know about it. So not actually that much of the paste in the actual syringe. So if some gets spat out, then that's not the dose that you'd worked out for the weight of horse. So that's a really important note. And then looking at other ways as well beyond chemical control. So anything we can do to break the life cycle mechanically rather than relying on those chemicals. So if we remember that first slide and the eggs that are passed out in the horse's feces, if we can remove those before the eggs hatch, then put them somewhere out of the paddock. So not having our muck heaps in the field, because that will undo all of our good work. Just taking that off the pasture, then that breaks the life cycle. Really fantastic way of managing parasites and levels.
And where you say cross grazing, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so running sheep, cattle, llamas, chickens, whatever, over that pasture, either with the horses or after they've been on. So any larvae then that are eaten by those animals, they're toast. They really tend to be species specific. So by interspersing that, those larvae are getting ingested by that animal and killed off as well. So again, that breaks that life cycle.
And I noticed that you've got a big cross on harrowing as well.
Yeah, it's a real contentious one, because harrowing's dead easy to make a pasture that's had horses in look really neat and tidy very fast. But actually the research shows that in this country, we're just not hot or dry enough for that to have the effect. And actually it's doing the opposite. So where the horses are laying the dung in what we call the latrine areas of the field, it's simply spreading it around onto the lawns where they graze more likely, and then more easy to pick up the larvae that are coming out from those droppings when they're hatching. So yeah, really not a very effective method there at all from a parasite perspective.
So I'm quite curious. You say it's not hot or dry enough. One could question that now with the change of climate, but what sort of heat is needed to actually be effective?
Well, it's more about we still, even when it's hot, you can get quite a dew in the morning, which it doesn't help. And so you're looking for the poo to be broken open, desiccated, the UV light to get in. And it's not having that as a reliable way really of breaking that life cycle. You're much better to do poo picking, to rest and rotate the grazing. So rather than having horses going back and back over the same land, if you can take them off and give that a rest of 3 months is great, 6 months better, a year, brilliant. That's particularly for redworm. I mean, things like tapeworm and ascarid have got their own issues. So particularly for foals and young stock, we tend to keep those in fields that are really near the house. They're obviously often sheltered, easy access, nice for the youngsters. But ascarids have a real hard, sticky shell on the egg, and they can live in our environment for up to 10 years. And so goodness. I know, right? So if you're always keeping the youngsters in the same field, you just get this build-up of this parasite challenge to the youngsters. And so the advice really is to rotate those as much as possible to lessen that environmental sort of impact, really. And with tapeworm, they have an intermediate host of this little grassland mite. So they're mobile. So they're much less affected by temperatures, because the mites can take themselves, off if it's hot or cold, and mitigate that and travel further. And so
crafty little Watsits, aren't they?
Yes. They really are, and that's what evolution has done for us, and that's what the challenge is that we're trying to circumnavigate now.
So how does it look for the future? Is it all total doom and gloom?
Well, really what we need to do as horse owners is to buy ourselves time, because there are developments in testing, in alternative treatments, but if we carry on as we are, the experts are telling us that it's going to be within years, not even decades, that we're going to be in serious trouble. I mean, we can look at sheep and see the problems that they've had there, land in Australia, South Africa, places in Wales, where they've really struggled to keep sheep because of this developing resistance problem. So there aren't any chemicals in development. I mean, the newest ones we've had have come from agriculture, but the newest ones that have been developed for sheep are unfortunately poisonous to horses, so we haven't been able to utilize those. So we haven't got that as a win, and we're not a big enough industry for them to develop wormers specifically for our use. So we're going to see things like developments in testing getting better. So I know, for example, there's a saliva test for encysted small red worm in development, which is going to make that even more accessible than the blood test that we've got. We may be refining our use of worm egg count. So particularly in places that are have already a lot of resistance, like the donkey sanctuary, they don't worm their donkeys until they get over 1,000 worm eggs per gram, rather than ours, which is much more around the sort of 200 mark. And we're understanding more and more about what sort of a burden a healthy animal can deal with, and probably then reacting to that as we get there. So those things are all going to help. And then also there are biological solutions like tannins and fungi. I mean, we know, for example, certain plants like samfoin have always traditionally been used for parasite control, and there are other things coming along that we're seeing really good progress with. But then how do you then package that, license it, get the product stable enough for commercial sale, dosage, all of that? So there's a lot of investment that's required on that in order to then have it for our market. So it's really then, these are all great things, but there's nothing kind of there, if you like, that's going to do that job. So it's how long can we buy ourselves with what we've got?
So it's using all the other tools that we can use to put that time off when they really aren't effective at all. So we really are buying time. So what would you say are the key take-home messages for us?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that we've got not just to think about our own horses. It's so easy to go and get a wormer and think that we've got that covered. And actually, we've got to change our mindset on this, because we are heading towards this spiral of doom, unfortunately, if we look at it that way. So it's not just about our own horses. We've got to think about the bigger picture. So the horses in our fields that are with us, treating them as a unit and worming only the ones that need it, and leaving the worms in what we call refugia to help slow this resistance. And it's for all horses, not just competition horses and cobs in fields and everything. Every horse needs this treatment, because what the research says is that we actually need to be looking at less than 2 treatments a year for every horse as an average, thinking about actually some youngsters need a lot more treatment than that to support them as they grow. So it's about now and into the future, and understanding that there are environmental impacts to worming as well that are really negative. So again, it's not just resistance, but other things that we can do to help the bigger picture of the environmental sustainability as well, because a lot of the wormers are very toxic in the environment too. So we kind of got to normalize sending off our horses' poo in the post to the lab.
And it's interesting because because the cost, a lot of people think, the cost of worming, but actually, broadly speaking, it's no more expensive to do worm egg counts or to do these testing than it is to actually buy a tube of wormer.
Once we get into it, yeah. So if you start doing the testing, you might uncover some problems, which actually is a good thing, because it's going to save you down the line from getting into a pickle and potentially further pathological problems. And then once you get into the groove of this and you get your management right and everything else, you know exactly what's going on and you've got it monitored. You're not storing up potentially expensive problems, not to mention obviously the threat to the horse's health and everything else. So yeah, it's changing our perception of things and looking at this as actually a really good way of monitoring our horse's health. Often with horses that have low worm egg counts through the seasons, if it slowly starts to rise unexpectedly, you know then that potentially there is an immune challenge. It's a bit of a barometer of what's going on in the horse. So it's really like, let's look at this in a scientific way rather than waiting to kind of, store trouble or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this last slide says it all, really. If it's time to worm, just think, what else could you do instead? And the worm count is the best thing that you could do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a really humble tool, but actually, one is a good snapshot, but a series is what really starts to tell the story and gives you a good awareness of what's going on in the horse. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you say, it's taking control of the situation and not just sitting and waiting back to get the inevitable worst result at the end.
Definitely. Yeah. And, helping horses be healthier, essentially, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. I think that's been really useful to show the problems we're facing and how we can actively start to overcome some of those problems and fight back. We are very happy to take any questions. We had some really nice comments. I think people have found it really, really useful. And if you did miss any of this at the start, then it's available both on Westgate and Beta's Facebook and Beta's LinkedIn page to watch again. So thank you very much, Claire.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having us and the ability to come and spread this really important message. So yeah, really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.